Hey everyone, it's Katherine with Free Tours by Foot. Today we're going back to school. We're going to go on a little walk around the campus of Columbia University and then head over to the Cathedral of St. John the Divine to check that out. So let's get started. So we are starting off here. We are on Broadway. I'm just at 117th Street and Broadway. So we are really right outside of technically the gates of Columbia's campus. That said, Columbia has buildings that go all around this area. They actually also own about, over 7,000 apartments in the area. A lot of them are used for faculty and staff. And something else I wanted to point out is the building across the street that says Barnard. Barnard has a lot of buildings in this area as well. While not technically, legally a part of Columbia University, Barnard was created in response to the fact that Columbia University did not admit women until 1983. Yikes. So Barnard was the women's college that was affiliated with Columbia University. Now, if you go to Barnard and get a degree, of course, Columbia does admit women, but if you were to get a degree from Barnard, it would actually have the signatures of both the heads of Columbia University and of Barnard College. So you can see the gates right here. We're going to be going in the main gates at 116th Street. So Columbia University, very famous university. I'm guessing actually most people watching this have heard of Columbia or know something about it, but we'll do a little background anyway before we start walking through the campus. So Columbia University is one of the Ivy League universities. So if you've ever wondered what Ivy League actually means or what makes a school an Ivy League school, it's actually an athletic conference. It's just the 8 schools that make up this particular athletic conference, the Ivy League. Now that said, the Ivies, besides the athletic conference, do all have a reputation for academic excellence, prestige, very, very selective admissions, and a lot of them are actually older universities as well for the United States. 7 of the 8 Ivy League universities, including Columbia, actually predate the founding of this country and were part of the foundation of the original 13 colonies. So we're gonna head in here. It's almost graduation. That's why we have the congratulations to the class of 2021. We'll head in the main gates here. We're right at 116th and Broadway. So Columbia was actually not Columbia when it was founded. Columbia University was founded in the 1750s by royal charter when we were a British colony, and it was called King's College. Now, in the grand scheme of U.S. University, 1750 sounds very early, but not really when you consider that Harvard had actually been around for about 100 years at that point. They started discussing the need for a higher education institution in New York in the early 1700s, but nothing much really came of it. It actually wasn't until a little bit later on, when New Jersey got Princeton University, that all of a sudden we were like, oh yes, we absolutely must have a college here as well. So gotta love that New York-New Jersey rivalry. It was alive and well even then. So King's College, like most of the original colony of New York, the city of New York and the British colony of New York, was much, much further downtown from here. We're in Morningside Heights, so we are quite far uptown right now. So this was all actually located on the grounds of Trinity Church in Lower Manhattan, and that's where it stayed for a while. King's College actually came to a screeching halt with the onset of the American Revolution. The college was closed down for several years. They did not hold any classes. In fact, their building was repurposed as a military hospital by both the British Army and by the Continental Army. So there were no King's College classes for about 10 years. When the revolution was over in the 1780s, the British had evacuated New York, and all of a sudden they look around and say, this university existed by way of a royal charter that now, since we are not a British colony, we consider kind of null and void. So do we even still have a school? And so they had to apply for a new charter from New York State. And of course, at that point, name King's College wasn't really going to fly anymore, and so it became Columbia University. So right here, we are coming up on Butler Library. So two main libraries on the campus here at Columbia. One is Butler and one is Low, which we'll see in just a little bit. This one is Butler. Give you a look up here. You can actually see some of the names up there. Ralph Waldo Emerson, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Edgar Allan Poe, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Thoreau, Melville, and then all the way up at the top, which I don't think you're going to be able to see from this angle, you have some names like Plato, Sophocles. So this library, though it's very classical in look, is actually not one of the oldest buildings on campus. This was built in the 1930s, but very much to blend in with some of the older looking buildings on campus. You can see the door right there. During the academic year, Butler Library in some part is open 24 hours a day. So if anybody did not study in a timely manner, they can go cram at Butler Library in the wee hours of the morning. So once King's College became Columbia University, they actually stayed downtown for quite some time. They moved up to a Midtown campus in the 1820s, and then eventually moved all the way up here to Morningside Heights in the 1890s, and that's when they started to plan this campus. This is a 32-acre campus, which is a pretty good-sized parcel of land, especially for Manhattan. And so the design of the campus was largely done by Mead, McKim, and White, a very well-known architecture firm at the time. And they were very much responsible for the look of the campus that we still see to this day. So keep walking this way. I'll talk a little bit as we walk, tell you a little bit more about Columbia, talk about some of the things that we're seeing. But coming up here on the left, we're going to be seeing something named for one of the most famous alumni of Columbia University, or actually he was technically a student at King's College, and that was founding father of the United States, Alexander Hamilton, for Secretary of the US Treasury. So he attended King's College, and actually he and John Jay, who was the first US Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, were instrumental when they had to redraft the charter to shift from being King's College to Columbia. They were both on the committee that helped kind of figure out what the way forward for Columbia was going to be in this new U.S. University. So there's Hamilton Hall, named after Alexander Hamilton. There's a statue of him right out there. In more recent years, Hamilton Hall here has been the site for some pretty high-profile student protests. Students would actually come in and take over Hamilton Hall. Probably the two best known examples of this, 1968, students came and took over Hamilton Hall, and that was in protest of a plan to build a segregated gymnasium in Morningside Park, which is nearby. Another one occurred in the 1980s, and it was students protesting and demanding that the university divest themselves from holdings in South Africa, which was under the control of the apartheid government at the time. So the tent you can see ahead is not a permanent thing, obviously. That's actually up for graduation, which is coming up. So that's not something you would see all the time, and actually because of graduation, we're a little bit more roped off. I'm going to have to be making some kind of funny zigzags as we go through, but that's okay. I don't mind if you don't mind. So you get a little look here. Normally you'd be able to walk just straight through right across there, but not right now. So I'll give you another look at the graduation setup, which will actually be bigger as well. So it goes all the way there, and then you'll have people sitting all the way up here as well. A lot of US universities have their graduations in sports stadiums. Columbia does not do that. First of all, their stadium is not here on the main campus. It's quite a bit further uptown. But also, why in a stadium when you could have this beautiful view of some of their buildings? So right across from Butler Library, this is probably the more recognizable of the two Columbia libraries. This is the Low Library, named after Seth Low. So both Low Library and Butler Library are named after former presidents of Columbia University. So this is the older of the two. They finished this in the late 1890s. This is one of the older parts of the Morningside campus here. And right up here, we have the famous Alma Mater statue designed by Daniel Chester French. Very recognizable, and actually one of my favorite little Columbia superstitions or myths is that on the left, right by Alma Mater's left leg actually, hidden in the folds of her dress is an owl. It's kind of hard to spot, and they say if the first freshman to spot Alma Mater's owl hidden in her dress is going to be the valedictorian. So we'll see. So you got some very pretty spring blooms here on the campus of Columbia. Here's a campus map right here. So it says Columbia University, Morningside Heights. So the reason they would specify the Morningside Heights campus is, even though this is the main campus, and this is certainly the really well-known one, this is not the only part of Columbia University. Like I said, they do have some buildings outside of this square, 32 acres, and they're a little further up and down Broadway. The medical school is actually up in Washington Heights, so quite a bit further uptown. And Columbia, back in 2007, I believe, spent $7 billion on what was going to be called the new Manhattanville expansion. Manhattanville is a neighborhood a little north and a little west of here. It was formerly largely an industrial district. If you drove through there or walked through there, you'd see a lot of big warehouse-looking buildings, factory-looking buildings. So Columbia announced this massive expansion up there, and that they were going to start building a lot of new construction. And some people really praised the plan. They certainly needed a little bit more space than they have here on their Morningside campus. But as with any major expansion, they did this via eminent domain. So they did evict longtime residents, some longstanding businesses. Some people make the argument that the area looked kind of blighted. Some of those buildings were falling apart, but a lot of people did really protest what they viewed as the shoving out of long-term residents and the coming gentrification of the area that was absolutely certain to follow. So that is actually still ongoing. We see a lot of construction up there in the Manhattanville campus, but some of those buildings are done already. So we'll have to see. So we are behind the Low Library right now. Just taking a little walk. A lot of these buildings back here are academic buildings. You have the School of Mathematics is back here. One of the religious studies is back here. Some of these are also housing as well. So students do often live on campus, at least in their first year or so, when they're here at Columbia University. And just the side of Low Library right back here. So throughout its time, Columbia has become known as an incredibly prestigious institution. I think as of this year, it is officially considered the third most selective school in the United States. So 1 and 2 were Stanford and Harvard. Number 3 is Columbia. So very, very difficult to get into. Has a very, very well-known law school, a well-known journalism school, a well-known medical school, very highly regarded scientific research facilities. This is actually, as far as doctoral institutions go, regarded as one of very high research activity. I actually believe the first uranium atom was split at Columbia University. So right back here, I just wanted to come back and show you by the philosophy building. Of course, we have the Thinker. That makes sense. So right up here, you can actually see a sign pointing to the International Affairs, one of the International Affairs buildings. Columbia has always had to kind of shift and adjust with the times as far as what studies were most popular, what was considered really, really necessary. International studies was one that was a little newer in the grand scheme of Columbia University, certainly if you consider that it's been around since the 1750s. It really wasn't until after World War II that people started to see the importance, the need of studying international relations, and universities started having international affairs programs and foreign relations where people could study these things and hopefully avoid what everybody had just gone through. So we are going to walk. We just made kind of a loop behind the Low Library, and we're going to walk right up here. We'll be heading down these steps, but actually from up here, I think I will be able to give you a really good kind of panorama from this upper tier.
So if you're enjoying the tour so far, go ahead and hit the like button and help others discover the video. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, subscribe to our channel. We have walked across the Brooklyn Bridge, through Harlem, Central Park, and more. We also have virtual tours and channels that focus on Washington, D.C., New Orleans, London, and more. Look for free tours by foot wherever you travel. Now, back to the tour.
Okay, so we will go ahead and head down the stairs here. So it's interesting, now that you've walked through and seen some of the buildings, at least around here in this main area, they were definitely not all built at the same time. You can probably tell that they weren't all built at the same time, but I do think they've managed to keep the architecture really blended. Everything has just this nice sense of cohesion, and it really makes it feel like a university campus, which is kind of unusual in New York City. A lot of our schools don't feel like typical US universities, and that they don't have a classic campus center like this. A lot of them are just buildings sort of scattered all over a neighborhood. New York University is a good example. New York University doesn't have a campus. They have a lot of buildings, a lot of real estate, but kind of scattered all over Greenwich Village and part of the East Village. And Columbia University, like I said, this is not everything. Their stadium is not here. Their medical school is not here. They do have things that go on outside of the boundaries of this square here, but they also own a lot of land that is not used for the university at all. Columbia University, believe it or not, second largest landowner in New York City. First largest is the Catholic Church. So they do own a lot of property. And one of the surprising ones, maybe you've heard this before, they actually were the owners of the land that Rockefeller Center was built on. When John D. Rockefeller Jr. was taking out this lease on the property to build Rockefeller Center, he was leasing from Columbia University. So rents on land holdings like that are a really big part of Columbia's endowment and how they are able to pay for things. I'm going to give you a look at the gates here. So these look very similar to the ones we walked through on the other side, but we are now on the east side of campus. We're on Amsterdam Avenue. So it's funny, you walk outside the gates and look, we're right back in Manhattan. They do manage to have a very different, distinct feeling there within the gates. So we are walking now. Another Morningside Heights landmark is the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. And so we are going to head down there and check it out. Don't think we'll be able to go inside the cathedral today, but we'll at least be able to check out the outside and be able to get an idea of the absolutely immense scale of this place. You know, one of the first things you need to know is that the Cathedral of St. John the Divine is not finished, actually. I think most estimates put it at about 2/3 finished. But even at 2/3 finished, it is considered one of the largest Christian churches in the world. And that's by area inside. So even unfinished, it is still absolutely massive. And I'll try to walk, I don't know that I'll be able to walk a full circle around it because of how it's blocked off, but hopefully I'll be able to walk around it enough to give you an idea of just the absolutely immense scale of it. So this cathedral, unlike St. Patrick's, which is the seat of the Catholic Archdiocese in New York, this is an Episcopal cathedral. So this is the seat of the Episcopal Diocese in New York. Sometimes I am asked, particularly by international visitors on tours to New York, like, what does that mean? What is Episcopal? Well, this actually goes back to the fact that New York and all of the 13 original colonies were under British control at one point. And so during that period, the Church of England was the dominant religion at the time. Now, certainly there were other religious groups in all of the colonies, but that was the dominant one. And so we had a lot of people in New York that considered themselves staunch supporters of the Church of England. And then the revolution was over, and that became a bit problematic. One of the biggest issues was that anytime a new clergy member took their vows, one of their vows was to swear allegiance to the supreme head of the Church of England, which was the monarch. And so that really wasn't going to work anymore. And so a new religion was formed, essentially, that was the Church of England minus the monarch. And that, in a nutshell, became the Episcopal Church in the United States. So, due to our British colonial roots here in New York, we had a lot of people that were Episcopal, and there was no cathedral for a long time. They didn't actually start this until the 1890s. The idea of having a cathedral was not something people were really into at the time. But started to come around to the idea and started to think we do need a large seat of the Episcopal Diocese. There's our first look at St. John the Divine right across the street. So they needed to choose a site and they needed a design. Now, choosing a site in the late 1800s was getting a bit tricky. They wanted a lot of space to build on. They wanted something where they could go absolutely massive in scale. I mean, the idea was they were building the Westminster Abbey of the United States. So a site like, say, St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown, we're going to be a little more limited in terms of space. So they decided Morningside Heights was going to be their ideal location. Morningside Heights was much, much further uptown. The community over here in Morningside Heights, you can see kind of this adjacent community, was starting to become a little bit busier residential area. And the area to the east of here, though, Harlem, was not yet the bustling neighborhood you think of today. Harlem had historically been a farming community, and by that time was just starting to be developed as a larger residential area. So plenty of room to grow here. The other thing they really, really loved is that Morningside Heights was actually a high plateau that kind of overlooked the rest of the city. They loved the idea of being on this really high ground and having this beautiful vantage point. So they chose this spot. The only thing that had been here previously was an orphanage. Don't fear for the orphans. They actually just relocated the orphanage up to Westchester County. They didn't just evict them into the street. And they decided to have a design competition. So the design competition idea was that they were going to open this up to anybody and everybody, and they did, but they had some firms that they were particularly interested in. So they actually solicited some firms and they paid them money to enter this competition. So I'm going to go along the side here so I can start walking back a little bit and be able to show you a little bit of the scale going back. So they had this competition. They ended up choosing a winner. There you go. See the side there. They actually went with their second choice, believe it or not. Their first choice, one of the architects was the half-brother of the bishop, and they thought they would be accused of nepotism, and so they didn't go with their first choice design. And maybe they should have, because they ended up changing course pretty abruptly. They laid the cornerstone of this place in the 1890s, and then about 10 years later, they decided rather than the Byzantine revival style that they had chosen, they wanted to shift gears and they wanted to go with a Gothic revival style. And so they had to go back and change everything they had already done and add Gothic detailing to it. So here's another closer look here at the front. So we say it's not finished, and I know I certainly don't mean there's not a roof on it or anything like that. But actually one of the major unfinished parts, according to the design, are what were supposed to be the two towers here. So you can actually see this one has been built up a little bit. If you're looking closely, you can even see the stone at the top is very clearly newer than the stone underneath. And this one has not gotten any more height yet. So building was slow for a number of reasons. One of them, of course, was that this was very large and it was going to be very expensive, and fundraising was a constant issue. One of the others is that in the first half of the 20th century, they were stalled completely by not one but two world wars. When these world wars came about, typically construction would halt completely, sometimes for a number of years. But they did manage to get quite a bit of construction done. Was not without its challenges. One of them was that they had commissioned 8 granite pillars, and they were going to hold up the roof of the choir. They were the second largest granite pillars in the world at the time. And they had them sent here. They were made of granite from Maine, and they were so absolutely massive. It took them a year to figure out how to stand these things up so that then they could put the roof on. So definitely working with things of this scale was very challenging. That was actually something they realized as they were doing this design competition. They were mostly soliciting American firms. Very few American firms had any experience with cathedrals. This is work on an absolutely massive scale, and it's very detailed, and there's a lot of artistry involved. So these two doors I wanted to show you. These beautiful bronze doors out front. All of these detailed biblical scenes. They spent all of this time and all of this care went into making these doors, and they use them 3 days a year. I know that sounds crazy, but they really do only use them 3 days a year. It's kind of a lot to open them. I mean, look at how absolutely massive they are. I'll go in a little closer so you can see some of the beautiful detailing. So the days of the year that they use them are Easter, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, when they open them up for the blessing of the animals, which if you are ever here, you gotta come see this. People bringing all kinds of pets here to have their animals blessed. And I think my absolute favorite of all, the other day these are opened for the blessing of the bicycles. It's a real thing. So people can bring their bicycles here and have them blessed. So this is looking out right from the big front doors at St. John the Divine. Like I said, these are only used 3 days a year. The other side doors are the ones that are used every other day of the year. So back to a little history. I had told you construction did halt temporarily during World War I. It did. But they got a lot of work done between World War I and World War II. They actually managed to lay out and finish the entire length of the cathedral. There's some of the everyday doors. The entire length of the cathedral, which is just over 600 feet, I think about 183 meters. So it got to its full length in 1941, exactly 1 week before the attack on Pearl Harbor and the US's entry into World War II. So really just in the nick of time, because of course during World War II, things shut down again. Now, even though they had gotten the full length of the cathedral done, there was still quite a bit to do. They said they still needed to finish the towers, they had a transept they needed to finish, and it was going to cost quite a bit of money. There was a lot of concern over, they shouldn't really be fundraising when everybody is in the throes of a world war, and so they didn't. They stopped construction, they stopped fundraising, and actually there was no more work done on St. John the Divine for 3 decades after that. Not that they couldn't have. Actually, with the post-World War II economic boom, certainly fundraising probably would have been something that could have been done pretty successfully. They did not, though. The leadership of the church in the years following World War II felt that the money that could have gone to that absolutely should not be spent on further construction of the building, but rather on helping the social programs and the community. So that's really where the money went for the next 3 decades, was in going to open a soup kitchen, in having social programs, in aiding in the fight for civil rights, in protesting against the Vietnam War. So that was really the main focus of St. John the Divine for many, many years. Construction did pick up again in the late 1970s. And so what was happening by that point was they had decided to scale back some of the original plans, a shorter height for these towers here. And rather than this massive spire that they had been planning, they thought a smaller dome. Have some really pretty flowers planted out front. And so work did commence again, and it continued, but got stalled over and over again. Often by fundraising was lagging. Actually, one of the things they ran into when they finally started construction again in the late 1970s is that they needed very, very skilled stone carvers to do this work according to the design. And there really just weren't as many by that time. And so finding enough labor was often one of the really big problems. So I'm walking along the side here. I'm gonna go back as far as I possibly can because I do want you to have, again, an idea of the absolute immense scale of this, how long this cathedral is. I know I can say 600 feet, but I think it's hard for most people to, really get what 600 feet looks like. So they have chipped away at it since 1978. Some work has continued. They definitely were delayed twice in the first 20 years of the 21st century. They've actually had 2 fires, one in 2001, one in 2019. Both times there was minimal damage, but a lot of work to be done cleaning after the smoke. So you can see back here, and I will show you from further back when I can, when we head back the other way. There's a beautiful dome that's being planned, and that's one of the newer additions to the back here. So you can see clearly this modern building on this side here. And we're going to be able to go about that far back, and we'll have to start looping around. But it goes back that way. And then we start seeing some of these other buildings around here. So all of these other buildings on the property, we refer to this as the Cathedral Close. And that just means buildings that are on the property that are not a part of the cathedral proper. So some of these are the school, some of them are dedicated to some of their social programs. This fenced in area here is actually closed to the public, the general public, Monday through Friday, because they do have a school on property, and it's reserved for the kids, for their students, which is fair. So I want to show you from back here. You can see, I want to see that tower again with a little bit of new construction, and then all the way back this way. You can see some scaffolding. Scaffolding is a very, very common sight at St. John the Divine, because, like I said, it is still unfinished. And, you know, anytime the church's leadership is asked about, you know, well, when is it going to be done? Their response is typically one of a couple of things. The main thing is really, they think that their priority for spending their money should be on social programs and helping their community, which I have to say sounds like the right thing to do. So the other thing is actually you'll say now, if you go on their website and you ask, like, why is it unfinished, they actually will point out the grand tradition of the medieval cathedral. Those cathedrals took hundreds of years to finish, and they just did them a little bit at a time, and they changed and they evolved over time. And St. John has very much the same thing. I mean, we even changed courses, you know, about a decade in, and went from Byzantine revival to this neo-Gothic structure, because this has taken so much longer than they originally thought. You know, some of the carvings, both inside and outside, you know, you've added more modern figures. You can find carvings of Martin Luther King Jr., of Mahatma Gandhi, certainly something that wouldn't have happened if they had finished on their original timeline, beginning in the 1890s. So this is another look here at the garden, at some more of the cathedral close, some of the buildings surrounding. You can see a little bit of that dome back there. So it may not be finished, but it is still really beautiful and still very impressive. We'll walk around this way so you can see a little bit further, kind of the edges, the perimeters of their property. So if you come here on a weekend during this school year, some of these areas are opened up to the public, but during the weekdays, just for the kids. You can see some more buildings here on the edge of the property, more of the cathedral close. But I am gonna head right here so that I can give you a good look up at the cathedral from the other side. Originally, they said it would be finished in the year 2000. That was when they picked construction back up in the later part of the 20th century. And you know, clearly we missed that target a little bit, but maybe someday, every time you come to New York, you can just check in here at St. John the Divine, see what's going on here, see if we've gotten any closer. Maybe we have, and someday it'll be finished. But always worth checking out. Definitely worth taking a walk around. You can certainly go inside the Cathedral of St. John the Divine when you visit, as long as it is during their hours. They do charge, it's really a donation to the church, but they will ask you for money to go in if it is not specifically during services. We're right here, 110th Street. You can see Cathedral Parkway. 110th ended up getting a new name when St. John the Divine was here. It is referred to as Cathedral Parkway. You'll actually see that on some of the subway stations. Here, instead of saying 110th Street, they'll say Cathedral Parkway. Closest subways are, if you go that way, you get to the 1 train, and that way you can go to the BNC train. But there you go. There's a good look at almost the full scale of St. John the Divine. Thanks for joining me on our walk. There's a lot more that we can see together, so make sure you subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We have walks going on in cities all over the world, in New Orleans, in London, so check out everywhere. And you can see it all from the comfort of your home. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.